Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Pathbreaker, the podcast series from Path Builder, where we talk to individuals who are sector experts, who can provide career advice on specific sector within the social impact sector. Today, we have Rosa Abraham, who's part of the Azim Premji University. Hi, Rosa. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Great. So thank you so much for being part of this podcast. Rosa, it'll be great if you can just introduce yourself to the listeners.
Sure. So I'm an assistant professor at the Center for Sustainable Employment at Azim Premji University. I finished my Ph.D. in economics from the Institute for Social and Economic Change in Bangalore. Prior to that, I worked as a lecturer at the Madras School of Economics. I also did some research work at the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment. I did have a brief stint as a risk analyst with Amazon.com, but broadly my sort of work is in economics and research around the labor market with specific focus on women and the measurement of work.
Great. So most people, relate being a professor to teaching, but you do a lot more than teaching, right? So can you tell us, like, what is the work that you do?
Yeah, so I think my role, although it's an assistant professor, I actually teach only occasionally. So I teach a labor economics elective at the university. But and so the predominant focus of my role is really research, and the kind of research that I do at the Center for Sustainable Employment is research on issues relating to India's labor market. So questions of unemployment, the lack of job creation in the economy, these are things that have especially dominated the media and news for a long time now. And so at the center, we look at these questions. On one hand, we look at sort of analyzing the existing policies, how these are working towards job creation. We also propose policies that could potentially create good jobs, create decent jobs for women and other marginalized groups. We also, besides doing this kind of analysis of policy and recommendations of policy, we also conduct surveys to basically do some in-depth research on a particular very niche question that we have on hand. So broadly, it is one kind of quantitative work where we are doing analysis of existing policies, analysis of data that is already collected. But we also have primary surveys where we collect our own data and try and analyze that. And then we try and basically infer some narratives that come up from either the primary or the secondary data.
Got it. No, fascinating work. So if there's someone young, let's say a college student or a young professional, and they are interested in sort of the kind of work that you do, especially around research and how research can lead to policy change, what are sort of the, like, a typical role per se, or what are, like, where do they start?
Right. So at the center specifically, what we have is a research associate role. Now, before I talk about the center specific research associate role, I would also then just talk briefly about research associates roles that are not often with a think tank.
Mm-hmm.
In many universities, faculty themselves have a sort of research assistant role exclusive to them. So if a particular professor is doing some project and they need assistance on that, sometimes they also have funds to hire research assistants for their specific projects. At the center, we have many projects, so research assistants are often hired to work on one or many projects. Now, what does it mean to be a research assistant? So typically we hire folks with an economics background, either undergraduates or postgraduates. So people who finished either their BA in economics or MA or MSc in economics. And what does this work involve? So, like I said, we have a number of projects at the center. So, on the one hand, some of this work will be helping ongoing projects. So this could be doing extensive literature reviews on a particular question. So say you want to look at women's work in the economy and you want to write something about that. As a research assistant, you will be asked to go through what has been the major pieces on this. So looking through existing articles, popular media, and putting together a good write-up on that. That would be a literature review. It could also involve working with data. So like I said, we collect data from the field, but we also have data sets either from the government or from other private agencies. So you would do data analysis. So that is doing some kind of either simple basic descriptives of this data, what is average workforce participation, or any other, what are the number of people that has been spoken to, how many of these are men, how many of women, what are the kind of communities being represented. So simple data analysis. But as you progress, you would also be looking at answering very interesting questions around that data. So for that, we would use some kind of econometric or statistical tools that most economic students would be expected to be familiar with. Besides that, as I said, we also have surveys that are happening on the field. So as a research assistant, you would be expected to be very intrinsically involved with these surveys. And this involvement could mean going into the field and monitoring how these surveys are working. So it would involve actual field work. It could also be developing the software or working on developing the questionnaire and the survey instrument. That's what the questionnaire is typically called. And so this could be using an app to develop the survey instrument, making sure that it is working as you intend it to work. It would also mean monitoring how the surveys are going, both in the app as well as on the field. And then once the data comes in, as a research assistant, you would have to do some level of cleaning of that data, sanity checks of that data, and then also looking at some of the numbers and narratives that's coming up from that data. So there's a wide variety of work, both from looking at literature, but also then going out into the field and really getting your hands dirty with the numbers that are coming in.
Got it. And what would a typical day look like? You've talked about like an entire like a job description in terms of like reviewing literature to data to being on the field. Would a typical day involve all of it or just parts of it? Or maybe that's, yeah.
Yeah. So typically, as a research assistant, it would ideally you would be working on one project, as in that would be taking up the core of your time. So if you are, say, working on a survey that is ongoing in the field, your typical day could actually involve that you are out in the field and you are traveling either around villages or towns and making sure that the survey team is doing what you want them to do. And of course, communicating this back to your principal investigators, which is basically the other researchers that you're working with, and making sure that they are also being up to date or updated on what is happening. But if you're not involved in fieldwork, or if you say you're not interested in fieldwork, then you can always work with more, analysis-based work. And so for that, your typical day really would be sitting with a data set, crunching numbers, as they call it, and trying to say, okay, what is this data telling me? Is it actually making sense? So sometimes, it's always important to do certain validity checks in terms of saying, okay, is this data really true, or is there some mess up here? And that means maybe you might have to compare numbers from that data with other data sets. And so I think at some level, there is a monotony of that cleaning of data, but then there's also this huge, curiosity of saying, well, is this really what it is saying what it is supposed to say? Are there interesting questions that I can look at from the data? So as a research assistant doing that kind of work, you would really be not on your feet literally, but I think mentally you're on your toes on terms of, well, am I doing this correctly, and what are the kind of sanity checks and data checks that I should be doing, writing up some descriptives around that data. And of course, you work with other researchers, trying to also present data in a very meaningful way. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, it's also important to communicate these results, and we often extensively rely on research assistants to make very nice visual representations of some of the
Mm-hmm.
results that we have. And so that would also be a core part of your work as a research assistant.
Got it. So from a skills point of view, data analysis, knowing how to use statistical tools, visual representation tools like Tableau, seems like key skills and expertise that one needs to know. Is there any other sort of key skills, either soft or hard skills, according to you, that is critical for, especially a research associate role?
Yeah. So I think, coming from economics, I think it's absolutely crucial that that your technical skills are sound. And this is typically, by this I mean econometric skills and statistical skills. So even if you are somebody who is not interested in quantitative analysis per se, as somebody with an economics background, you are expected to know very simple statistical concepts. And I think that is a skill in itself, understanding what is a mean and how it is different from a median, what is the right measure to use or statistic to use when you want to convey a number. So those kind of technical soundness is absolutely crucial. And of course, this is something that you develop over work, but I think prior to coming into work, uh, as a student or even as an early career researcher, that's the only time where you actually have the indulgence of really going deep into some of these techniques. And I think that's an important skill to develop. But we are also insistent that our research assistants know some statistical software. So usually what we use at the center and many of the faculty use is a software called Stata, which as most economic students would be familiar with.
Yeah.
But Stata is an expensive software and it's not open access. And so for that reason, we also are happy with our research assistants knowing the software called R. R is open access and it's got a huge community, that very helpful community. So either R or Stata are important software skills to know.
Yeah.
It is also great if people have Python skills as well. But that's sort of the next step, really. But I think more than that, it's over and above that, it's really the ability to just constantly be able to update yourself and pick up new things more than actually doing a lot of things. It's also sometimes you also have to think on your feet, and you might be asked to work with a survey software while you're in the project. And it's, I think we really have the benefit now of having a huge resource base. It's either YouTube videos or it's your stacks, substacks, your guides, and I think it's an ability to just answer questions for yourself and not need a lot of hand holding. So I think that's a soft skill more than a technical skill, and I think that's crucial, and I think that's really something that will hold you in good stead.
Got it. And just building on to what you were talking about earlier, from the field point of view, right? Collecting surveys, or when supervising it, and the way you interact with beneficiaries is a skill by itself, right? What are certain skills, especially soft skills, that one needs to be aware of, especially when they are on the field?
Yeah, so I think when you're on the field, it's a completely different ball game. As I think one is, of course, sensitivity to the context, and the ability to know when a situation is potentially not healthy for you or for the person that you're interviewing, say, and the ability to say, we will stop this now, or we will terminate. I think that is crucial. Especially, if you're asking certain sensitive questions and it might trigger an untoward reaction,
Yeah.
knowing that, okay, I shouldn't ask this question in this situation, and the foresight, I think that is crucial. But also just being respectful of context and a particular uh, situation. I think that's something that is, I guess, called emotional intelligence. So looking around you and saying, well, I don't think this is a right place for us to be asking these questions, and let's withdraw from this. Or I think this person seems uncomfortable with these questions, and let's withdraw. Let's not terminate this. I think that kind of sensitivity is really important. But also, often as a research assistant, you'll also be working with other survey enumerators. So you will be leading a team of enumerators and monitoring them. So I
Mhm.
think also some level of leadership skills and bringing people together as a team, motivating them. These are also important to have, especially on the field, because
Yeah.
it really is hard work, and it
Mhm.
really is not something that comes with an instant gratification in a sense, because you're just spending your day asking questions, and sometimes it's always you get not very cooperative respondents. And it's important to keep team morale up, and I think that is
Mhm.
also an important skill as a research assistant on the field.
Got it. And once somebody gets experience as a research associate, what's typical career progression? Where can somebody who's young, once they get a few years of experience, think about, going ahead from a career point of view?
Yeah, so a research assistant job, as I understand it, is
Mhm.
typically it's a path onto something else. It's a place where you try and get experience or even get an understanding of what you yourself want to do
Mhm.
in your trajectory to something else. And now that
Mhm.
trajectory, like you've asked, is either an academic career
Mhm.
or it's a research-based career, which need not be academic. So, for instance, many of our research assistants go on. They come in as undergrads or masters. So the master students usually go on to do their PhDs.
Mhm.
So they use this time to really understand, okay, what are the kind of questions that interests me, and also try to understand, well, these are the kind of skills or technical skills that I've developed.
Mhm.
So and then that is very useful for them to then frame their proposals for their PhD and so on.
Uh-huh.
So from the research assistant, then there's the next path is often a PhD, which then leads typically into an academic career of teaching. So then you have then from there it's a very straight path of linear trajectory of assistant professor, associate, and then professor. So I think there it's quite clear. But it's not necessary that you need to take the academic path. We have many research associates who then go into, say, a master's in public policy, and then they move either into a public policy making career, or
Mhm.
they work with think tanks as senior research fellows and sort of focus exclusively on research and
Mhm.
not really on academic teaching per se. So I think that is also it's 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 become far more prevalent now than it used to be,
Yeah.
and but it's also a hugely satisfying and gratifying career path as well. If somebody who's interested in social issues and so on. So it's not necessarily academic engagement, but it is engagement with social issues as a senior researcher in a think tank or even in a public institution.
Got it. Yeah. So, and what I'm hearing is there are multiple options, and it's just not just about research and higher studies and career progression. Have
Exactly.
multiple options.
Yes.
Um, I want to put you on the spot a little bit. A lot of our listeners are young people who want to create, some kind of social impact. And then that's one of the reasons that they want to look at a career from a typical corporate side to something within the social impact sector. Given that
Mhm.
a lot of the work that you do is collecting data, analyzing data, coming up with policies, how challenging is it when you don't see impact, right? The way I'm trying to put this question is, if somebody worked in an NGO that's implementing, right, they're able to directly interact with the beneficiaries, see the impact. As in, you know, if you're doing research, you're collecting a lot of data, chances of it actually becoming policy, there is, you know, a chance that it might not happen, right? So, you know, how do you sort of manage that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So, I mean, personally, you know, when I actually set out the academic path, for me, my core interest was teaching, exactly for this reason, where with teaching, you see a clear impact. You are engaging with a student and and you can see the impact. So it was always, it's very instant, right? And the gratification from that is instant. It's great that way. But research doesn't have that, like you pointed out. And that is definitely a challenge that I think I engage with constantly, and it's something that I think I've learned to manage. So I think it comes with a healthy dose of cynicism and a healthy dose of hope. That as a researcher, you are cynical almost always that the kind of research that you do will directly feed into policy. But then there is hope that the research that you do will feed into narratives and discussions that will eventually feed into policy. So it's not a direct impact. So, for instance, when we were working around the labor market impact of COVID, we were finding increasing evidence that things were not as rosy, or things were quite terrible, especially for women. And I think, you know, so then you write popular pieces around it, you write research articles, you also write in the newspapers, in the hope that this will eventually translate into policy action. But more often than not, that has not happened. But at the same time, well, it hasn't happened maybe at a central level, but at the same time, what we are finding is that, you know, the more you keep putting these ideas out there, the more you keep putting these issues out there, the more it becomes more mainstream to say, talk about an urban employment guarantee. So 3 years back or 4 years back, this was something that was completely alien to the Indian economy, an urban employment guarantee. We have the National Rural Employment Guarantee, for instance. But we didn't talk, but we've been talking about this for many years now. And you know, now we see, especially after COVID, I think there are about 4 or 5 state governments that have increasingly adopted urban employment guarantees. Okay, so this was something that made us all very personally very happy. Of course, we don't claim credit directly for any of this, but as researchers, our hope is that the kind of things that we write and the kind of evidence that we have put out there over time has fed into the discussion in bringing these policies into place. So that's why I say that there is a cynicism that it's not going to happen immediately, that the research that you do will affect things, but then there is the hope that it will shape the discussions into policy making. And I think that is really what motivates my work as a researcher.
Got it. Yeah, no, I can imagine it being challenging, and finding sort of, you know, your way to balance the cynicism with the impact that you want to create.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Rosa, any last sort of advice to young people who are looking to be, let's say, a research associate?
Yeah, so I think my two advices. One is build on your technical skill. So if you think you want to be in a quantitative kind of work, then really go out there and develop, you know, your analysis skills and your quantitative skills, and there's enough resources there. But my second advice is more on terms of soft skills, which is networks. I mean, I cannot underplay the impact of developing networks around around this any particular research area that you're interested in. And it's difficult as an early career researcher, but I would say that there are a number of opportunities out there. And these come in the form of conferences, in the form of workshops, in the form of seminars. So, you know, if you are writing something that, or working on some kind of academic piece that is of interest to you, attend the seminars, or even if you don't have any such piece, attend seminars, ask follow-up questions, and try and meet people at these conferences and workshops, talk to them about your work, get feedback on your work. I think many young careers suffer from lack of mentorship.
Yeah.
They don't have the mentorship in the academic place that they come from. But I think there is a very big academic community outside, and I think many people are happy to help or at least give feedback on work. And I think people should use that. So I think it's crucial to develop networks, both in terms of your peer group, but also in terms of the senior community as well. And that is done through engaging with them through physical meetings and workshops, but also just emailing saying, hey, I read this article that you wrote, I had a couple of questions, or I thought it was interesting, but I just wanted to follow up on this, or this is related work that I do. Would you be interested in reading this? I think these are really simple nudges, simple actions that young researchers can do, which can often go a very long way in their own careers.
Got it. No, absolutely. I think very useful advice for young people who are looking at a career as a research associate. Thank you so much for your time, Rosa. And thank you, listeners, for listening in to the podcast today. Hope it was insightful. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our weekly job compilation that gives information on job opportunities in the social impact sector for freshers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amit.
Always welcome. All right. Thank you.